afternoon. I'm Grant Swartzwelder, President of OTA Environmental Solutions, and welcome to Oilfield Strong webinar. This is I think our 47th one, so have really had good traction and really looking forward to it. As you know, if you want to go see any of the previous ones or see this one or pass it on, you go onto YouTube and look under OTA compression, and you'll see our YouTube channel with all our various speakers and the videos associated with that. So if you want to introduce someone to what we're doing, or in this particular presentation, that's a great avenue to do so. As you can tell, this is not Commissioner Jim Wright. He unfortunately has come down sick and was had to cancel here, but also on several others. But as I've mentioned to Aaron, Aaron Krejci is Director of Public Affairs for the Commissioner. And instead of just kind of leaving us hanging, he was kind enough to sit in. And I really appreciate that, because a lot of folks would just say, tough luck, go get them. And but I think I was kidding him also that I think a lot of times having someone like Aaron, we end up getting more of the details and facts a little more open, but he countered that Commissioner Wright is a pretty open book also, but we'll find out at the end. But Aaron, thank you very much for stepping in, and I think you'll fill in very admirably. And then it sounds like we might have a chance later on to get Commissioner Wright on and let everyone hear. But with that, let's go ahead and jump in. You got several things going on. You got a little weather action, you got a little legislative action. So you shouldn't have any need for things to keep yourself busy. You want to kind of give us an overview of either of those, or we?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you again, Grant. Thank you all that are participating for allowing me to speak in the Commissioner's stead. I know he wanted to be here, and we'll make sure to follow up and get him on in the future. Quickly, just the topic du jour today and this week has been the weather outside, and you know, I briefly wanted to talk about that and just kind of update folks on what we're seeing and what we're hearing from the industry side, and as it relates to our electrical grid. Certainly the commission has been focused on this effort, both earlier in December and here this week. We have worked with our emergency management teams. We're contacting operators and communicating between the Railroad Commission, other state agencies. A lot of roads are being impacted through this storm, especially up in the Permian region. So communicating with TxDOT about any problems that may arise, or road conditions that are prohibiting the industry as a whole from functioning to the highest degree they can. Happy to report that things are looking very good. You know, there's been a lot of communication in the mornings and afternoons about the status and progress and any issues that have arisen, but so far the gas supply chain is performing well, and there's been no major issues reported by production or transportation or the underground storage operators. So, but if there are, you know, if any of your folks here are having issues with roadways, please feel free to reach out to me or your respective emergency management coordinators at the Railroad Commission, and I can give you some information on that. But I really wanted to first start by talking about the state surplus and the 88th legislative session. We got some good news at the beginning of the year regarding the comptroller's estimated budget, and the numbers are good. They're reporting 188 billion in revenue for the next 2 years and 32 billion in surplus that are available for spending. This is in no small part because of the industry and what we have accomplished over the previous couple of years. Texoga's recent report has said that the oil and gas industry in the state has contributed almost 25 billion in state and local revenue in 2022, which is roughly $67 million every day. And that's going to public schools. It's going to fund transportation, road projects. So that's the good news. As the 88th legislative session is kicked off, we had inauguration. There's some mention of the priorities for the upcoming session. Among those was increasing our dispatchable and thermal generation here in the state. As we are all aware, Uri opened some eyes as to where we get our power, how we get our power, and how reliable that power is when we truly need it. And the commission has done a lot since that time to work with the PUC and others to ensure gas supply for our thermal generators, but we need more. We have more people moving into the state every day. Our industry has increased dramatically over the past decade, and our thermal generation has maintained or decreased slightly in that same time. So wind and solar is, it's a great contributor, but it's not a reliable contributor at all times. So that's been a priority of, that was mentioned specifically in both the governor and the lieutenant governor's inaugural addresses. Something that I think the legislature is going to focus on, in addition to some of the PUC reforms that have occurred since Uri. But all that to say, it's going to be a hot topic and something that we'll be dealing with and discussing for the foreseeable future. As far as Railroad Commission activity and some recent actions or updates on issues that we're focused on, one is seismicity in the Permian Basin. As you all are certainly aware, or maybe aware, there were some rather large earthquakes in the latter part of 2022. The commission has been addressing this issue for some time and will continue to do so. We've created several seismic response areas in 2021. We will be evaluating and updating those areas in light of the recent earthquakes. I think there will be some more information coming out from the commission here shortly regarding what that looks like. But in addition to increasing the size of those seismic response areas, we'll be looking at how we permit and what additional data would be helpful to determine contributing factors, or just having that increased data on what was occurring in the area at the time of any future seismic events will be helpful in addressing this situation. So, this all gets back to water and produced water and the amount of it that we have in the state. The seismic activity wasn't mentioned in the governor's inaugural remarks, but our need for water was, and it will continue to be an issue for our state as our population increases and we go through these various droughts. The commissioner has been very focused on the produced water sides of things, and what we can do both to address the seismic activity we have in the Permian and ways to better utilize this resource. I mean, this is if there are ways to treat this water, to reduce the levels of injection by treating and finding treating to standards that are acceptable for some land discharge or others. I think that's an area that we need to focus on. The state legislature last session passed the Produced Water Consortium, who's done a lot of work in this space and will continue to do so. I think that as we move forward, look at pilot projects about treatment standards and how can we get this technology to a economically feasible level, because the one thing we don't want to do, the two things we don't want to do, number one, we don't want to have to limit production or shut down production because of seismicity concerns. And of course, and then number two, we want to make sure that the water, as we find reuses, that we're doing so in an environmentally conscious way, and that we're getting the most, whether that's saving surface water, saving the surface water resources that are used currently, so that those can be used for agriculture, or however we do it. It just needs to be, and will continue to be a focus of the commission, and certainly a highlight of Commissioner Wright's outlook for the next 3 or 4 years. But with that said, another thing that's a focus of his is reforming some of the environmental standards. Rule 8 in particular is one of the reasons that he ran for the office. And this rule hasn't been updated in quite some time, and between the actions of the federal government, which I won't get into right now, we can discuss that if there's any questions on it, but between what's happening at the federal level, the state emphasizing the need for water and other things of that nature, and the fact that we haven't updated this in 20 years, the commissioner believes this is a time that we need to spend to address it. Again, the Permian area, as it relates to the success of this state and the success of this nation with regards to energy independence and energy security, is unparalleled. So we need to focus, and the focus should be on how do we solve these challenges in a way that is best for our state, that continues our economic prosperity and all the wonderful the lifestyle that we enjoy, without without harming the industry, while also respecting and understanding how we can improve going forward. The commissioner always says, it's better to have the industry recognize and develop solutions to these problems than for a government or a regulator, whether it's federal or state, to come in and dictate that. His focus is for the industry to set that path forward, to look for those solutions. And so that's the hope, and that's the goal of and focus of us for the next few years. And with respect to seismic, I'll say that there has been a large amount of industry cooperation with the commission in identifying and addressing and providing data so far, and look forward to that continuing in the future. So with that, I'll just kind of, I don't know, Grant, if there's some questions, or if you have.
No, I have a couple of follow-ups. You gave us quite a few things that we could chew on. Let's talk about the seismology. And there was an article in the morning news a couple weeks ago talking about how New Mexico charges for disposal of water, but Texas doesn't. So a lot of disposal comes from New Mexico into Texas. And the article talked about it creates seismology issues, but it also is we're missing a revenue source.
Yeah, well, I think so. I don't think that, to my knowledge, New Mexico doesn't necessarily charge for disposing of produced water, but what they do have is some very strenuous restrictions on their injection, on their produced water injection.
That's better said.
Yeah, and the problem, so what's occurring is those limits have incentivized, I guess, in some respect, that water to travel across state lines into Texas to be disposed of in our neck of the woods. And the issue is, as we have more seismic activity, and we are curtailing, deep injection and seeking more data, we're placing extra burden on ourselves, or there's an extra burden being put on us by the fact that this water is traveling down. I mean, the seismic response areas, and these earthquakes are, I don't think it's any coincidence that they're closer to this, that they are in that area. Now, there's a lot we don't know, and a lot we're learning about where these fault lines are and how injection impacts the faults, and but all that to say, it is concerning that there is a vast amount of water coming in when we have our own water that we are disposing of and need to dispose of. So that article raises a lot of interesting questions and points. I have spent a lot of time on the federal level. I worked in Congress for a number of years. I'm somewhat familiar with the Interstate Commerce Clause, and I think this is an issue that has presented challenges in the past. And to be honest, at the end of the day, this is not something that the Railroad Commission directly could just, say, oh, we're gonna start imposing a fee. It's something that really needs the input of the state legislature, but it's something that they should, I think the commissioner would agree that should be looked at as far as how do we level that playing field again. Obviously, one solution would be for New Mexico to take a look at what they're doing from a regulatory perspective, but I don't think that as it sits now that they'll do that without maybe some action on our side to have them reevaluate whether that's a wise policy on their end. So.
Yeah, it does seem like New Mexico could solve that by opening up like some shallow injection wells, things like that. But I would guess that the likelihood of that is pretty remote given the environment over there. So what's the likelihood of doing an import tax or some type of a balanced load on that?
That's a question for the legislature, and again, that's one of many solutions. I wouldn't, I think that it's first you got to identify the problem. The problem overall is that we have a lot of water that we're injecting in the ground, and in certain areas it's causing seismic activity. And then another aspect of that is that we're not only injecting the water that we produce, but that from out of state. And so how the legislature chooses to address that, or to have conversations regarding that is it's really something that needs to be looked at from a state level, and not necessarily just the regulatory the agency level. So it's good to have the elected folks that on both sides just have taken an extra look at that. So I don't have the solutions. That article did mention some what has been done in Ohio. I've heard conflicting things about how that's been reviewed from more to the east in East Texas with regard to Louisiana, and that wasn't as it made it less clear about what we can and cannot do. But certainly, I think raising awareness and raising this issue is worth our time.
And for attendees, if you're interested in that article, just send me an email and I'll send you a scan of that. It brings up some good points that Aaron is alluding to there. So when you're dealing with water like that, you either minimize the amount of water that's coming out, and that's New Mexico, but you're producing water, so you've got to do something with it. So then you talk about filtration and all the different, and obviously or using it for refracs. It seems like some of the larger companies are able to do that, especially if they have a lot of contiguous acreage where they can keep it. But what do you see things that the Railroad Commission can do to kind of use that water, to filter that water heck, it seems like if you can filter it down to a certain point, you could irrigate all sorts of West Texas. But talking to one of the companies, the liability is still such that they just don't feel like they can, even if they filter it down to a really acceptable level, to put that out on the ground.
Well, so the water we produce and where we're injecting it is clearly it's an area we're going to have to continue to focus on. Obviously, we're using it for other frac jobs and of that nature is great. We want to do that. It's being done. But the fact is, I think if we look at the numbers that we could only use a portion of that water. As you alluded to, and I think this is an area that the commissioner is very focused on and is looking to work with folks that want to develop pilot projects or for land application. Yeah, I mean, and with respect to the treatment standards, clearly, there's a range of where you can of what treatment standards, if this is drinkable water. I mean, the ideal solution is that we recharge aquifers, the Ogallala and everything like that, because the water is so clean. But there's also areas in between, I think, that can achieve both and are less prohibitive from a cost perspective. So, treating it to discharge standards. What the commissioner is focused on is looking at, and this is part of those pilot projects or the additional research and the produced water consortium, is what is the tolerance for the soils? Like where would you do this? And having kind of some baseline studies on soil tolerances and then you can get a better idea of to what standard you can treat that. And obviously you need land for that. But there's that's one thing that West Texas has is a lot of land. So so I think there's some promise there. As a businessman, Jim, obviously he thinks about these as in terms of markets and how feasible something is from an operational standpoint. And the more that we have to restrict injection or volumes because of seismic activity, and of course, the protection of health and human safety is paramount, comes number one. So the more that we have to restrict that water has to spread out. It's got to go further to get injected, or it's got to it's got to go further, it's got to go somewhere else. That adds costs, and which is just the reality of it. So as the cost of injecting becomes, increases as new technologies emerge, and we can lower the cost of reusing this water for beneficial purposes, whether that's cotton, agriculture, or land, natural vegetation. As those costs decrease and the disposal costs increase, we start to get into this zone where it is feasible and it is more attractive and will become more attractive. So I think that's where things are headed. It's just a matter of when and what the different cost differential is. But I think there's investors as far as ESG for oil and gas companies, concerns that you have to show that how you are being environmentally conscious. Well, water is the lifeblood of our society. So what better way to show that? I think I think there's benefits there will be benefits from long-term perspective and going forward. So
one last question on water, and then we'll move to something else. That I was always amazed how with gas, oil, you have good records of all that, but as far as keeping up with how much water is produced and then how much, where it goes. There, best as I can tell, there's not good tracking of any of that. So you don't really know, so you're up to different oil companies to say, yes, I've recycled this amount, but you don't really know what your problem is, where it's all coming from. Has there ever been thought of requiring tracking that type of volumes?
Complicated question, but I think, we have to start somewhere. So injection amounts or volumes, there's a whole host of issues, who this water, there's the whole industry of midstream water companies that are taking the stuff that you don't need and delivering it to another point where they need it for a frac job, or and that's all well and good. As far as the data, yeah, that's something we do need. We are looking to improve upon, because between the Railroad Commission and BEG, the Bureau of Economic Geology, who does kind of the seismic work as well, we need to have better data to determine, okay, was there a specific cause? Was it a specific, injection pressure? Was it a specific volume that was occurring? What else was going on? So, looking to improve the data we collect and to do a better job of that is certainly an area we're focused on.
I can imagine that the challenge is that most companies don't like giving data, and so to go and try to require more of that, there's a natural.
Yeah, I mean, and there's I think some of the ideas that are being tossed around, and I don't really want to get ahead of. I think you're going to see some stuff in the next week or so that from the commission, just kind of talking about ways.
Go ahead and share.
Well, it'll be out soon, I think, but it's the focus is better collection of data and incentives to provide that data. So that could be higher injection allowance or what have you, if you participate and provide this information. So, again, don't want to get ahead of the commission. I think something will be released with respect to, and really in respect to the SRA areas. But again, I don't want to get too far ahead.
Well, we'll stay tuned on that. Well, kind of speaking of the whole ESG kind of theme here, that flaring was always the top thing. How much you flaring intensity. And as I talk to oil companies out there, usually it comes down to the reason they have to flare is because not enough takeaway. Do you agree with that? And then if so, how do we solve that?
Well, I mean, it's a useful product that is in high demand in Europe and in the United States. So yeah, clearly, if it's the ability to get that product to market, and how do we utilize that? Mostly, I mean, there's upsets and various things that can occur, but so the goal is always to reduce that number, and it's something that I think operators and everyone else is, whether they're on the production side, is they want to sell that gas. They don't want to necessarily light it on fire. But so pipeline capacity and takeaway is a huge part of this. And I think one thing that the commissioner always notes is that this industry isn't stagnant. It's constantly moving. It's constantly moving to new areas and new wells and things like that. And the infrastructure doesn't necessarily it lags behind. It's the fact of the matter. We're currently flaring under 1% of our gas that we produce, and it's dropped dramatically, in part because of the large takeaway that that has come online in the past few years, going to going from the Permian down to the coast. And I think you'll see more of that. In fact, there's about 4.5 BCF of gas takeaway planned and in progress in the next year and year and a half or 2 years. So and they'll go in on their own pace, but clearly that's the solution, and that's what I think you're seeing. We saw a big drop back in a few years back in the level flared, and I think that was in large part because additional capacity and takeaway came online. So it's a constant give and take or tug on but which comes first? It's generally the production and then getting that infrastructure out to it. But we have had a large focus at the commission on making sure you have a plan for that gas whenever you're drilling that well. We don't, permitting time or flaring exceptions have decreased, and we're asking a lot more questions and I think operators have responded in that respect. So they're planning ahead, which is what we all want, and what's in the best interest of our state.
Speak to that as far as the flaring permits and all, and this might be getting into too much detail, but because I know like in New Mexico, if you have and go up into the Rockies, you have very little time, if any, to flare. You have to basically have it ready to go right then. But I don't think Texas is to that degree, but there is it seems like y'all are watching the exemptions and the times more.
Certainly, the exemption time and also what the plan is. One thing I'll say that the Commissioner Wright specifically is he's looking at, as they come up, and I'm not the best person to speak about this, but I'll say that as far as Commissioner Wright's concerned, he wants to know what your plan is. Okay, so if you're drilling and you don't have a plan of what you're going to do with your associated gas, then that's not, you better find one quick. And you better, what other options are available if you don't have, if there's issues with the pipeline, what else can you do to utilize that gas? Can you do something at the wellhead? Can you do something that is powering some other useful purpose? Because our mission statement at the Railroad Commission is to ensure the responsible stewardship of our natural resources, and so that's a mission that he feels strongly about. And when looking at these individual applications, is something he's focused on.
You mentioned Rule 8 and updating. Are you in a position where you can kind of give an idea of what changes you're looking to make, or the commission's looking to make on that, or what people should be looking forward to? Or
I won't get into it. Jim is definitely the expert on this one, but I will say that this has just been an area of focus and something that he has worked towards with respect to it, to the role or roles in general at the commission. He has often seen, in working with TCEQ and the Railroad Commission in the past on various things, that the commission's guidance, the rules were needed more detail and clarification, and it wasn't as cut and dry. There were no kind of guidance documents related to how the commission plans to implement this, or what the standards are and things like that. So I think broadly speaking, that's a focus of his, and something that he wants to ensure that going forward we have that's a kind of a level playing field, clear expectations, and less one-off cases, or just that there's the standards are consensus consistency.
And I think you're saying more than just Rule 8, because what we see with, we have a group that does environmental work for companies, and it's, there's a lot of uncertainty, and so it gives a lot of discretion for the regulator to change and move, and that makes it hard to do business if you don't really know what the answer is going into it.
Right. And so that's, yes, that consistency and just clear expectations and you know, is something that I think was a driving, one of the things that drove him to run for the office, and having some you know, clear standards in the guidance portion, I think specifically is helpful. So
good. Well, we've reached our 30-minute and actually kind of went over it. Aaron, definitely appreciate you stepping in, and look forward to having the commissioner come in and maybe visit with us and go into some of these details and on other issues as well. But really appreciate your time, and everyone appreciate y'all's time being on here, and we'll look forward next month. We will have a presentation on kind of updates on New Mexico rules from an environmental standpoint. So that should be very timely and informative. But Aaron, thank you, sir.
thank you so much.
All righty. Take care, everyone.
All right.